I was holding a casserole dish I had carried across 3 neighborhoods in the November cold when my daughter-in-law opened the door, looked at me the way you look at a salesperson who rang the wrong bell, and said, "This actually isn't a good time, Harriet." The dish was still warm through the oven mitts. I'd made the shepherd's pie the night before, let it rest overnight the way my mother taught me, reheated it that morning so the edges would crisp just right. My son had called 4 days earlier and said, "Come Sunday, Mum, we're doing a family lunch." I had written it in the little calendar I keep on the kitchen counter, the one with the pictures of Cape Breton in autumn. November 17th. Circle in blue pen. Underlined. She was wearing earrings I had never seen before. Good ones. The kind with small stones that catch the light. Behind her, through the gap in the door, I could see the dining room table set with the linen napkins I had given them as a wedding gift. Someone had lit candles. There was laughter coming from another room, low and comfortable, the kind that means people have been together long enough to settle in. He said Sunday, I told her. She tilted her head a little, the way people do when they're deciding how patient to be. "He must have forgotten to update you. We have friends over. It's more of a..." She paused, searching. "A curated gathering. You understand." I did not understand. Or maybe I understood exactly. She said it before I could find any words at all. "Very likely, the way you say something you have rehearsed enough times that it no longer feels cruel. Honestly, Harriet, you really should think about scaling back. We can't keep planning around you." The door closed. Not slammed, that almost would have been better. It just closed quietly the way a chapter ends. I stood on their front step for what felt like a long time, but was probably only a few seconds. The casserole dish was getting heavier. November in Hamilton is not gentle. The wind off the escarpment has a particular kind of edge to it, something that gets into your collar and stays. I walked back to my car. I placed the dish on the passenger seat. I sat with my hands on the wheel and did not start the engine. Scaling back, that was the phrase she had used. I drove home to Dundas the long way, not on purpose, I just kept missing turns. My house is a detached bungalow on a street where most of the other houses are owned by people who have been there since before the subdivisions crept east. I bought it in 1991, the year after my husband Gerald passed, because I needed something that was only mine. 2 bedrooms, a garden in the back that I have been arguing with 30 years. A kitchen with a window above the sink that faces east, so I get the morning light when I do the dishes. I parked in the driveway and sat there. The shepherd's pie was cooling on the seat beside me. I went inside eventually. I did not turn on the lights. I walked through the front room in the dark, coat still on, and sat down at the kitchen table. The afternoon light was grey through the curtains. I pulled off my mitts and set them on the table and just sat. It wasn't only that afternoon. That was what came to me slowly, sitting in the cold kitchen. It was the birthday last March, when I arrived at the right time with the right gift, and my son met me at the door and said they were running behind. Could I maybe wait in the car for 20 minutes? I waited 40. The cake I brought was store-bought because my daughter-in-law had once mentioned she found homemade things a lot. The grandchildren never came out to see me waiting. It was the Christmas before that when I drove 2 hours in the snow to their house in Ancaster, and by the time dinner was served there was no chair set for me at the main table. I ate at the island in the kitchen with the children because, my son said, they had underestimated the head count. It was every time I said yes because I was afraid of what no would cost me. I took my coat off finally and hung it on the hook by the door. I put the kettle on, and then I did something I had not done in a long time. I sat back down and I made myself think clearly. There is a drawer in my kitchen, the narrow one beside the stove that everyone has but nobody organizes. Inside mine, under the takeout menus and the expired coupons and the good scissors I keep losing, I had put a folder a few years back. I called it in my careful retired school secretary handwriting, Family Support Ongoing. I took it out. I spread everything on the kitchen table and I started reading. My pension from 31 years with the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board comes out every month. It is enough to live on, if I am careful, if I do not replace things that still technically function, if I keep the thermostat at 19 degrees and wear a cardigan. I had not been living only on my pension. The transfers had started small. 3 years ago, when they bought the house in Ancaster, my son called and said they were a little short on the land transfer tax. It was a one-time thing. I sent it. $6,000. Then his wife's business needed a professional website and a branding package. She does interior consulting, the kind that requires a certain image, she explained. I did not know what a branding package cost. Now I did, $4,200. Then school fees for the grandchildren, because they had enrolled them in a private program in Westdale, and the registration payment fell at the same time as their mortgage renewal. Then the SUV registration. Then the SUV registration. Then the renovation on the back deck. Then the dog's dental surgery, which I thought was probably not a real thing but apparently is. Then the membership at the fitness club she had joined for her mental health, which I understood I did because I know what it is to struggle. Then the grocery delivery service, because they were both working long hours and it was either that or no one eats a real meal, my son said. I laid every transfer record and every bank statement on the table in a line. 89 individual transfers in 3 years. The total was $94,000, spread across 36 months. That is just over $2,600 per month that I had been quietly pushing out of the account I had spent 31 years filling. My retirement savings, the ones Gerald and I had started before he got sick, were supposed to last me until I was 85. According to my financial advisor at Libro Credit Union, I had reset that estimate by 11 years. I would outlive my money. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something on the street. A car went past, normal November sounds. Scaling back. She had said I needed to think about scaling back. I refilled my tea. My hands were very steady. That surprised me a little. The next morning I called Libro Credit Union before I had even finished breakfast. I asked to speak with someone in accounts, and I was transferred to a woman named Brenda, who had the careful, unhurried voice of someone who has managed a lot of difficult conversations. I told her what I needed. I needed to stop all outgoing e-transfers to my son's accounts, both his personal and the joint account with his wife. I needed to remove his name as a secondary contact on my checking account. I needed a full review of any pre-authorized payments linked to external accounts that were not my own. Brenda was quiet for a moment. All of them, I said. She began going through the records. It took longer than I expected because there were more threads than I had realized. At one point she paused and said, "Mrs. Cartwright, I need to flag something for you." My stomach did something strange. There was a request submitted last month to add a secondary account holder to your registered retirement savings. The form was incomplete, but it came through our online portal. The email address used wasn't yours. I set down my mug. Whose was it? She read me an email address I didn't recognize immediately, and then I did. It was a slight variation of my daughter-in-law's business address. One letter transposed, the kind of thing that would look like a typo to anyone who wasn't looking closely. Did it go through? No, Brenda said carefully. It was flagged during secondary review because the security answers were incorrect, but it's the second attempt, Mrs. Cartwright. There was a similar request in August. I looked out the window above my sink. The morning was very bright for November. The light was doing something nice on the back garden. I need you to put the highest level of security alert on every account I have, I said. I need my son's access revoked from everything, and I need to speak with someone about what next steps look like if this continues. Brenda said she would arrange everything. Her voice had changed slightly, warmer but more serious. We see this more than people realize, she said, not unkindly. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat there and breathed. Then I called my lawyer. Nancy Okafor has handled my files for 12 years, since she was still at the old office on King Street West. She is precise, and she does not fill silences with reassurance, which is something I have always appreciated. I told her what Brenda had told me. I described the August attempt and the November attempt. I read her the email address from memory. Nancy was quiet, in the way she is quiet when she is thinking, not uncomfortable, just processing. Then she said, "I'm going to need you to come in this week and bring everything." I brought the folder. The first messages came that evening. I had made myself a proper dinner, roast chicken thighs with root vegetables, the kind of meal that takes an hour and requires your actual attention, which was what I needed. I had eaten at the table with the radio on. I was washing the pan when my phone started. The first message from my son, "Mum, the Netflix family plan is showing an error. Can you check the payment info?" 3 minutes later, also the kids' hockey registration bounced. "The club is asking for confirmation." Then his wife, Harriet, "There seems to be an issue with several of our automatic payments. Are you aware of this? Please advise." Please advise, as though I were a contractor who had missed a deadline. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I set the phone face down on the counter. I finished listening to the radio. By the time I went to bed, there were 19 messages. I did not read all of them. The few I opened moved in a very clear progression. Confusion first, then irritation, then a kind of brittle urgency that tried to dress itself up as concern for me. "Are you okay, Mum? This isn't like you." And then, just before midnight, from my son, "I really hope you haven't done something drastic. We should talk before you make any decisions." Before I make any decisions, past tense would have been more accurate. I turned off the bedroom lamp. The next 2 days had a texture I struggled to describe. I went about my routine. I shoveled the front walk after the flurry on Monday, went to the grocery store, had coffee with my friend Wendy at the cafe on Dundas Street. Life continued to arrange itself in its ordinary way while I understood a certain amount of chaos was organizing itself in Ancaster. My neighbor Barry mentioned he'd seen an unfamiliar vehicle parked outside my house on Monday evening. "Nice truck," he said. "Idled there for about 20 minutes, never got out." I thanked him and made a note to call Nancy. The confrontation came Tuesday morning. I was at the kitchen table with my second cup of tea and the crossword when I heard the car in the driveway. Not my son's usual SUV. Something smaller. He must have had it in the shop. He knocked first. That was something. I had half expected him not to. I let him in. He looked like he hadn't slept. That was the first thing I noticed. He is a big man, my son, broad across the shoulders the way Gerald was, and he has always carried himself with a kind of easy confidence that I was proud of, even when I probably shouldn't have been. That Tuesday morning he looked the way a building looks after a controlled demolition, still standing but wrong somehow. Like the structure was there but the supports weren't. He sat across from me at the kitchen table without being invited to. "Mum," he said, "what did you do?" I put down my pen. "Good morning. The mortgage pre-authorized payment didn't come out. The car payments are flagged. Vanessa says her business account is showing a hold on the deposit she was expecting." He stopped. "The kids' school called about the tuition installment." "Yes," I said. He stared at me. "You stopped everything." "I did." He ran a hand over his face. I watched him do the calculation in his head, the one where he decided whether to be angry or strategic. Anger won, but only briefly. "Why would you do this without warning us, without any conversation?" I stood up and went to the counter where I had left the folder. I placed it on the table in front of him. "That is 3 years of e-transfer records," I said. "Bank statements, pre-authorized payment schedules. The tally at the bottom of the last page is accurate. I checked it 3 times. He opened it. He flipped through the first few pages. His expression shifted in a way that told me he hadn't known the number. That was the part that hurt in a different way than I'd expected. Not that he'd taken it, that he'd never even counted. I didn't realize it had gotten to $94,000, I said, in 3 years, while I kept the thermostat at 19 degrees because I thought I was managing well. He was quiet for a long time. Mum, we were going through a hard patch. You took 3 vacations to Mexico in that same period. I know because you sent photos. Another silence. The financial pressure, he started. I know about the RRSP access attempts, I said. His face changed. Something behind his eyes moved in a way that told me he hadn't known, or he was deciding quickly whether to have known. I watched him and I felt something cold and clear settle over me. Either he had known and was pretending otherwise, or he hadn't known and his wife had been doing this without him. I wasn't sure which was worse. What RRSP access? Your wife attempted twice to add herself as a secondary account holder to my registered retirement savings, August and November. The bank flagged both attempts because the security information was wrong. I paused. If it had gone through, she would have had signing authority over my retirement funds. He stood up from the table, not aggressively, almost involuntarily, the way your body moves when it doesn't know what to do with information. She wouldn't. He stopped. The email address used was a variation of her business address, 1 letter off. The bank has it on file. My lawyer has a copy. He sat back down. I watched my son sit with that. He is not a bad person. That has always been the complicated part. He is someone who got comfortable with comfort, who stopped looking at where things came from because looking was inconvenient. Entitlement doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just expands quietly into whatever space you leave open. I didn't know, he said finally, and something in his voice made me believe him, not entirely, but enough. Then you need to find out, I said, and so do I, and so does Nancy Okafor, who you will be hearing from in an official capacity if anything else touches my accounts. He left 40 minutes later. We had talked, or something close to it. He hadn't asked for anything back. He hadn't threatened. He had just gotten quieter and quieter, until the quiet meant it was time to go. I stood at the window and watched his car back out of the driveway. It was 2 days later that my granddaughter called. She is 23 and in her 2nd year of nursing at McMaster, and she and I have always had the particular closeness that sometimes skips a generation. She asked if she could stop by after her shift. She sounded careful on the phone, the way she sounds when she's working up to something. She came in smelling of hospital corridors and wore her scrubs still, which meant she'd come straight from campus. I made her tea and she sat at the same table where her father had sat, and she held the mug in both hands and looked at it for a while. "Grandma," she said, "I found something at the house." She told me that she had been over to her parents' place to pick up some winter things she'd left in storage. Her mother hadn't been home. Her father was working. She'd let herself in with her key and gone up to the office on the 2nd floor, and on the desk, not hidden, just there, open, she'd found papers. She pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward me. They were financial documents. My name was on several of them. The header on the main page said TD Home Equity Line of Credit, Application Support Documents. There was a property description. My property, my bungalow on Hat Street. My granddaughter had photographed 4 pages before she heard a car in the driveway and put everything back. "Mom came in while I was still upstairs," she said. "I didn't say anything. I just got my coat and left." She looked up at me. "Grandma, I think she was trying to put a loan against your house." I looked at the photographs on her phone. The HELOC application listed my property as collateral. My daughter-in-law's business was named as the primary beneficiary of the funds. My signature on the authorization line of the supporting letter was not mine. It was close, but it was not mine. I have a very particular way of writing the H in Harriet, a habit from decades of signing school forms. The signature on that page made the H differently. "I need to send these to myself," I said. My granddaughter nodded and forwarded all 4 photographs to my email. We sat together for a while after that. She told me about a difficult patient she'd had that week, a woman in her 80s who had no one to call, and she said it mattered to her, which made her voice catch a little. She told me she had started putting $50 a month into her own TFSA. She said she'd learned to cook 3 things properly and was working on a 4th. She said she wanted to stand on her own before she asked anyone else to hold her up. I squeezed her hand. I couldn't quite speak. She left just after 9. I emailed the photographs to Nancy that night with a note explaining what they were. Nancy responded the next morning with 2 words: calling today. What followed was several weeks that moved in 2 directions at once. Outwardly, things were quiet. My life resumed its proper dimensions. I took my walks. I went to my Tuesday morning watercolor class at the Dundas Valley School of Art, something I had postponed 3 winters in a row because something always needed doing for someone else. I let myself buy a decent winter coat, a proper one. The warm charcoal wool one I had been standing next to in the store window at Copley for 2 years, telling myself was impractical. It was not impractical. It was exactly what a Canadian November required. Beneath the quiet surface, Nancy was moving. She contacted the bank. She contacted TD regarding the fraudulent HELOC application. She sent a formal letter to my daughter-in-law's last known address. She told me there were several possible paths forward and outlined each one without editorializing, because that is not her way. My daughter-in-law, I learned through my son, had retained her own lawyer. My son called me on a Thursday evening, not a text, an actual call. He asked if he could come to dinner. Just him. I said yes. I made lentil soup because it was that kind of week. He arrived with his coat collar turned up against the cold and stood in the doorway, looking like someone who had made a long drive and wasn't sure of the welcome. I told him to come in and hang up his coat. We sat in the kitchen and ate, and it was, for a while, uncomfortable, in the way that honest things often are at first. He said he had moved into the spare room. He said he had hired someone to go through the household accounts with him, a financial counselor through his employee assistance program, and that the number had been clarifying in the way that painful things are clarifying. He said he understood now what he had let himself not see. He did not ask me for anything, not for money, not for forgiveness on a timeline, not to minimize what had happened. He ate his soup. He helped clear the table. He asked about my watercolor class, genuinely, the way he used to ask about my watercolor class, genuinely, the way he used to ask about things before comfort made curiosity feel unnecessary. Before he left, he stood in the front hallway and said, "I'm sorry, Mum," not as a thing to say. Actually sorry. I told him I knew. I told him sorry was the beginning of something, not the end of it. He nodded. He went out into the cold. The legal matter with my daughter-in-law took months to fully resolve in the way these things do, slowly, with documents and waiting. What I can say is that the HELOC application was never completed. What I can say is that my accounts remained intact. What I can say is that my property remained mine. My granddaughter came for dinner every few weeks, usually on Sundays when she wasn't scheduled. She was a good cook by the time spring came. She made an excellent roast chicken, actually better than mine, though I did not say that out loud. She talked about her program, about the patients who stayed with her, about the kind of nurse she wanted to be. She had the TFSA habit now, automatic, non-negotiable. She said she wanted to understand money before it understood her. By April, my son had begun coming on Sunday afternoons with the grandchildren. He did not bring his wife. I did not ask questions that were not mine to ask yet. The children ran in the back garden and argued about things children argue about, and I watched from the kitchen window while I got the snacks ready, and it was ordinary and quiet and enough. One Sunday in late April, he helped me move the patio furniture out of the storage shed, and we set it up on the back deck in the cold. Too early, really, but we both wanted to, and we sat out there in our coats with tea and watched the grandchildren kick a ball around the half-thawed yard. The light was doing what it does in April in southern Ontario. thin and gold and tentative, like it's asking permission to stay. He said, "I keep thinking about all the years you wore that old parka." "It was a perfectly good parka," I said. "It had a broken zipper for 2 winters. I was going to get it fixed." He looked at me sideways. I looked at him. We both knew. "I'm going to do better," he said, quietly, not as a promise that required an answer, just as a thing he needed to say aloud. I turned my mug in my hands. The garden was starting to come back, just barely. The first green things finding their way up through the cold soil. It always surprised me every year that they knew to come back. "That's all I ever wanted," I said. I still have the folder, the one I emptied and rebuilt with the new account statements, the correspondence with Nancy, the photographs my granddaughter took on her phone. It lives in the narrow drawer beside the stove, which I have since organized. The takeout menus are gone. The expired coupons are gone. The drawer closes properly now. I bought myself a small thing in March that I had been looking at since before Christmas. A watercolor set, a real one, not the kind from the dollar store. $47 at the art supply shop on King Street. I set it up on the kitchen table on a Sunday morning when the east light was good and the house was quiet, and I painted badly for 2 hours, and it was one of the best mornings I had spent in years. There is something that takes a long time to learn, or at least it took me a long time. Generosity and erasure are not the same thing, but they can look identical from the inside. I had spent years being generous in a way that required me to become smaller and smaller, to postpone and defer and do without, and I had told myself that this was love. I think it was love. I also think love does not require you to disappear. You are allowed to close the drawer. You are allowed to wear the good coat. You are allowed to take up space in your own life, even after 60, especially after 60, when you have finally earned the right to know who you are. The watercolor set is still on the table. I am working on the garden now, the one through the east window, which is starting to do what it does every spring, come back wilder and more stubborn than anyone planned. I find I am doing the same. I have thought a lot about that November evening, sitting at my kitchen table in the dark, with my coat still on, the shepherd's pie cooling on the passenger seat where I had left it because I could not bring myself to carry it inside. What strikes me now is not the anger I felt, or the humiliation of standing on a porch I had helped pay for while the door closed in my face. What strikes me is how long I had let it go on, not because I didn't see it. I think, if I am honest, I saw it clearly enough. I just kept telling myself that generosity was the same as love, and that if I gave enough, the love would follow. It doesn't work that way. That is the thing I had to learn the hard way. At 63, in a kitchen with a rattling furnace and a folder full of $94,000 I had quietly handed away. What happened to my son and his wife was not random. They had built a life on the assumption that I would keep filling in the gaps, and when I stopped, the gaps showed exactly how wide they had always been. That is cause and consequence, plain and simple. Not punishment, not cruelty, just the honest weight of what happens when you take the foundation out from under something that was never meant to stand on its own. I think about Vanessa, who had the intelligence and the ambition to build a real business, but chose instead to reach into accounts that were not hers. That is not a lack of ability, that is a failure of character. Intelligence without integrity finds a way to take rather than to earn, and eventually the two paths diverge in ways you cannot walk back. My son had the harder lesson, the one that came from realizing he had been comfortable enough not to look. Comfort is a quiet thing. It does not announce itself. It just makes certain questions feel unnecessary. He is a capable man. He is learning, slowly, what it means to use that capability honestly, to carry his own weight, to ask himself where things come from. That is the kind of thinking that builds something real. And then there is my granddaughter, who came to me in her scrubs after a long shift with photographs on her phone, and a steadiness in her eyes that I recognized as something she had chosen, not inherited. She had decided at 23 that she wanted to stand on her own before she asked anyone else to hold her up. That takes something most people spend decades trying to find, the willingness to do the hard thing before it is required of you, to build the habit of honesty into your life while you still have the room to practice. I kept the folder, not as a record of grievance, but as a reminder of what happens when I stop paying attention to my own life. The drawer closes properly now. The old winter parka is gone. The watercolor set is on the table. I find that the years after 60, if you let them, have a particular kind of clarity to them. You have run out of time to pretend. You know what you value and what it cost you and what you are willing to carry forward. I am not carrying the same things I carried before. Some of them I set down on purpose, some of them I simply stopped picking up. That, I think, is what it means to finally come home to yourself,